Hello and welcome back to the Anima Leadership Cafe. Each session, we explore insights and strategies that allow us to tap into our personal wisdom and collective strengths. So if you're looking to build healthier, more equitable, and interdependent relationships with yourself, your team, and your organization, you're in the right place. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you're the first to see when a new video is released.
I have a lot to say about this book. I'll get to that in a moment. I do want to just say thank you. Books don't get written by an individual. They really are informed. I mean, especially this book, because it contains so many stories and experiences from people that have been part of the Leader Labs for the last 4 years, as well as the more than, hundreds of individuals that I've worked with over the last 20 years of being an equity educator and consultant, where people usually come at break or at lunch or after the session is over to share their struggles inside the organization, all the ways in which they struggle to be heard, where they have to work twice as hard to prove themselves, where they are not offered special opportunities to prove their merit in order to get a promotion, where promotions are denied. And meanwhile, the parallel is always to watch their white counterparts in the organization find things easier. And often, of course, there are instances of overt racism in the workplace, but more often it's the subtle, insidious ways in which people in racialized and other minoritized identities, but this book is really speaking about race, get subtle messages that you are not equal and the impact that has. So at the heart of this book is the message that even though many of us occupy marginalized identities in the society that we are part of, many of us who are non-white, that it is possible to claim wholeness, that we don't have to we can, that it's possible to claim wholeness, and that, in fact, those of us that have been most wounded by the misuses of power have the greatest potential to learn how to model how to use it well, not just on behalf of other racialized and minoritized folk, but on behalf of everybody. And that I think many of us have the potential to be the system changers that our world so desperately needs right now. I also just want to acknowledge all the people on this call, uh, all the folks that identify as BIPOC, as well as those that don't. Um, the very fact that you're here, and I know the work some of you do, I just want to say thank you for the work you all do in the world. And it matters to not be isolated in this time when our systems are struggling so deeply. It matters to know that we are part of a community where other people are also challenging and speaking up. So the impetus for the book came from the BIPOC Leader Lab. I think it was year 2 when I was running the lab, and then Trump got elected for the second time. And I'm not going to spend more words on that because I don't want to give it airtime. But the part of me that is fire, I remember thinking, not on my watch is this man going to determine the narrative for my community. And that was the impetus to take material I had been creating for the Leader Labs and churn it into this book. I'm not going to share my own story of racism and struggling with identity and not feeling good enough for so many years and the ways that played out for me, physically, emotionally, and mentally, because I already, that was the first book, and I don't need to rehash all of that. But I do want to say that this book is really meant to talk about the patterns that play out, because of course the histories are very different depending on one's identity. Um, and it's not meant to flatten those differences or nuances, but more to say, here are the commonalities in the experience of being a non-white person in white dominant workplaces, and to give people a language around those patterns so that I think when we can see our external environment, we can liberate ourselves from it. We stop taking things as personally and see it as part of the environment we're part of. And it gives, and furthermore, the language around these patterns allows us to advocate for changing them, not just ourselves, but along with other people. And of course, there's a lot of strategies. I'm going to talk about the flow of the book in a moment, but I want to just going to read a couple pages from the first part, which is about identifying and naming racist patterns in the workplace, because it kind of contextualizes. It's so easy to internalize the message that I'm the problem here, or variations of it, such as I can't be myself, I can't take risks, or I can't shine too brightly. Yet each time we start to believe the problem is us, it's 1 point for racism, not for us. Or sorry, 1 point for racism, not for justice. The very nature of racism is to divide and conquer, to elevate white people and white traits and convey to people of color that they're flawed and inferior. I think about a brilliant Black colleague of mine who presented so confidently that people always loved him, flocking around him after we finished a session together. After a few months, I gave him feedback to slow down and take his time when speaking, explaining that doing so would give the group time to digest his words and help convey authority. He went so quiet, I started to worry I had insulted him. Then he stuttered, "But I worry people won't think I'm smart." "Sorry," I replied, shocked that this was coming out of his mouth. "I just don't feel like I have a big brain," he whispered. I'm rarely at a loss for words, but at that moment I was. Despite going to all the best schools, this kind, intelligent, highly educated person still believed his brain was not big enough. That's what he had subconsciously absorbed as a Black person growing up in white society. You'll never be as smart, as capable, or proficient as the white people around you who run all the institutions, who are represented in every oil painting in every musty old building, and whose faces dominate every textbook ever studied. From colonization to segregation, various waves of immigration, it's never been easy to enter leadership as a person of color. And this time of rising white nationalism across the Western world is another such period. Movements that push slogans such as anti-white racism and Make America Great Again, and their equivalents in other nations, are gaining traction around the world. If it was challenging pre-pandemic to name the discrimination faced, it's even more challenging now, sometimes even dangerous. The unconscious racism in the workplace has become more visible in the scapegoating of BIPOC people. Those DEI hires are too uppity, and they're asking for too much. They're taking all the jobs from us. Or their incompetency is causing issues. Most recently, President Donald Trump and his far-right government cronies have blamed disasters such as a Potomac River airplane crash in Washington, D.C., a cargo ship hitting the Baltimore Bridge, and the Los Angeles wildfires on diversity hires or policies. People like to claim they're colorblind, except when it comes to BIPOC people, God forbid, taking something they want, or just simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then color is all they see. Often, it seems, you can't win for trying any direction you go. Without people of color doing the bulk of the work, the economies of any Western nation would collapse. Indigenous people lost access to lands they negotiated treaties over and were forced to move into cities to pick up work no one else wanted to do. Black folks, many connected to the former slave trade, were freed only to be forced into entry-level jobs across sectors, working once again to please the white people in charge. It's no secret that there are more than 10 million undocumented Americans, many from Central and South America, who are left to take the unsavory yet necessary jobs keeping the economy going while remaining unable to access any benefits. This degree of servitude became blatantly clear during the pandemic, when it was predominantly people of color placed at risk, staffing the hospitals and long-term care homes, and working in close quarters to deliver food and Amazon purchases to the rest of society, often without access to care if they did get sick. Those of us who are working professionals of color also forge our careers in a system designed to privilege, recognize, and advance white excellence, with the unspoken attitude being, "You're lucky to be here," rather than, "We're lucky to have you." Many of us grow up believing variations of feeling not enough. But racism has nothing to do with the not enoughness of who we are, and everything to do with a socialized, not white enoughness of our skin, of our cultural background. Poet and author Cathy Park Hong nailed it when she wrote, "Racial self-hatred is seeing yourself the way whites see you, which turns you into your own worst self. Your only defense is to be hard on yourself, which becomes compulsive, and therefore a comfort, to peck yourself to death." If you take nothing else away from these pages, just know you are not the problem. Um, just very quickly, that reading was from one of the first chapters. So the first part of the book, just to take you through very quickly through the arc, really is about naming the conditions, naming the subtle patterns at play in the workplace, um, uh, overcoming imposter syndrome, talking about how when we talk about systems of whiteness, and I must just caveat here that I'm not talking about individual white people here. What I'm talking about are inherited cultural norms that silently and invisibly give preference for people in white identities. And I'm not going to explain that whole history. There's lots of books for that. But just to say that it's not solely about the color of one's skin. It is also about cultural norms. And I give the example in the book of Barack Obama, who, after being elected president, wasn't just, of course, it wasn't just the fact that he was the first Black president, but people critiqued the way he walked, the way he spoke, these subtle cultural mannerisms that didn't measure up. So, chapter 3 is really talking about what are the norms that have been inherited from um, uh, Western, like European cultures that themselves serve to reinforce exclusion often. The importance of finding our allies and supporters, because changing systems, changing the workplace is hard to ever do on our own. And the importance of holding space for the experience of discrimination while also not falling into victimhood, and what that line looks like. The second part of the book is really looking at strategies. I had to, and Megan knows this, my publisher, and Chris, my agent, this book was very, very, very different in its first iteration. I took probably a good quarter of the material from the first iteration out and boiled it down to what I thought was essential for racialized and other minoritized leaders. And of course, anyone can read the book. There's lots of great leadership advice, but just material that I thought would be most useful to folks that like myself and others I work with. So the second section is what are the most impactful strategies, the importance of knowing our purpose beyond just the job that we're currently in. Are we in the right role to be able to fulfill that purpose? What's the difference between just speaking and influencing? how important it is to set good boundaries, especially when one of the patterns for many racialized leaders and other minoritized leaders is to just say yes as a survival technique often, and to just work harder to prove oneself. Um, and yet, it is more incumbent or important to set boundaries so that we can have impact in the areas we wish. And the importance of picking our battles, because over time, as somebody who is often outspoken, we cannot change everything. And so, how do we discern what to speak up about and change, and what we perhaps hold back or choose silence around? The third section goes into, and very deliberately, so you can kind of see there's a flow. Uh, um, because the last section is about changing the rules of the game. And in order to do that, we have to change our own relationship to power and how power is used. And there's no shortcut. The only answer that I have come back to over and over again, to my chagrin, because I wish it were not so, I wish it were easier, and I wish I could avoid doing my own emotional work. Who wants to do that stuff? But the only way past is through. And so this section talks to lead in a leadership role. Of course, this isn't a therapy book, but the importance in a leadership role, like why it's important to notice things that throw us off our center, what our triggers, and how to work with those. And that doesn't mean swallowing micro inequities or things that happen that are unfair, but it does mean um, because when we're triggered, the greatest toll is to ourselves. To be able to move ourselves past that triggered place and then choose how to respond, and knowing that our response will be more effective. Talks about racial trauma. I really wanted this book to talk about leadership in a way that would include norms from outside of white Western culture. And so I sat with uh, this chapter, Befriend the Body. Wasn't sure, took it out, put it back in, took it out, and kept it in because I think part of the revolution that's needed is a connection again between mind and body, between head and heart. And that if we just leave feelings out of everything, we're not truly creating systems where people can be whole, where we can be whole. So, Befriend the Body talks about the power of um, connecting with our emotions and working with them in a leadership capacity, and how powerful I have found that when I've opened that space in executive and other senior leadership rooms, um, and how it's often the way through for teams as well. Rest is Revolution is pretty self-explanatory. And then Navigate the Backlash is talking about, in my experience, and many other minoritized leaders will talk about this, that how challenging it is when we gain influence to be placed between um, the leaders, white leaders who run institutions that don't understand the experience of what it is to um, be racialized, but then also members of our own background, identity, and community that often will take pot shots at us because they feel that they can. Um, Often it can be a projection of their own, maybe jealousy or desire to be where we are. And that has been a huge theme for so many leaders I've worked with. So there's a whole chapter on that. And the last is the reason I wrote the book. I'm not, this isn't a book to just, hey, be powerful because it feels good, or you can feel better in your own life. Really, the whole essence of the book is, hey, we need you to be whole in your leadership role so that we can actually change the very nature of oppression within our systems. The division, the polarization, the discrimination that it just continues to reinforce, which is destructive to everybody. This is not a book that's about, hey, we need more racialized leaders in the boardroom so that we can have representation. And then in another generation or two, there's another group that is marginalized and faces more barriers. No, this is, hey, we have when we gain influence, we have the ability to do this differently. So this last section is about that. How do we use power well? How do we create psychological safety in the workplace? Remembering joy, and joy can be a really powerful resource. Joy was, what's the word? Joy was an emotion I gave myself permission to quite late in my career. And I think one of the ones that is most important. The importance of cultivating forgiveness and thinking about that, particularly for racialized folks, and have some faith. Oh, um, maybe we could put, there is a, I'm just reminding myself, we do have a discussion guide that goes along with the book. So we will send it out by email, but we can also put it into chat. So if anyone wants to download it, you're welcome to. And then I'm going to just pause here because I feel like I've spoken enough. So Shaquille, I'll pass it to you.
So far, based on what you've heard on a little bit of the overview, what's caught your attention so far? What's interesting? What's helpful? And then we'll also get to some questions as well. So I'd love for you to reflect on those two things. Ani, could you, while people are going through here, and I will look at Rebecca and I will look at the question, but I do want to ask you this. Um, you know, you brought a lot of attention um, in this process to this four parts. You went survive, impact, heal, and thrive. Can you talk about just why, like, what prompted that? How did you come with those four things as an important part for leaders who identify as non-white? Just talk about the structure of the book just a little bit more as a from a meta perspective.
Hmm. Well, as you know, first there were 7 sections. So I believe that I've distilled it to what I think are the four core parts of the journey, and they map my own career path as well as I think that of a lot of folks, where I think unless one goes through the academy, through the university, and learns about critical theory or anti-oppression theory or anti-racism theory, whatever label you want to put on it, most folks are not aware of the waters that they swim in. And so that first section is very deliberate and just really wanting to shed a light on, hey, if you're noticing some of these things, here's language and here's context and here's what the patterns are. So that's that first section, which I think is a necessary starting place. And then the second one is, well, you kind of have a sense of your context. How do you have impact? And what I think are the essential pieces there. We can't have impact, and it's I could say a lot of things, but I'll just say this one thing. We can't have impact. For example, the first chapter there is about purpose. And I've learned over time, one of the key ways I choose whether I do certain work pieces or not is how connected is this to my purpose? Not every battle can, in fact, most I can't take on. But even if it's hard or the hardest thing, if it's connected to my purpose, then I know I can somehow have impact here. So that whole section is things that I think are essential to have impact in the workplace, and particularly for racialized folks. And then the third section is also, I spoke to this. I spent a lot of time personally feeling very angry. I that was useful for many years when I was working as a political organizer, nationally organizing political campaigns. It was fuel and it was very useful. And yet I was working to change these external structures of power, the democratic rules in my country, but I didn't feel empowered.
Mm.
that time period. It was a time when I was struggling most with mental and physical health. And so this third section is, hey, if you really want to be sustainable and have impact over the longer term, you gotta do your healing work so that you can discern when you're in your workplace, you can discern what's your own baggage from what is happening in front of you, what you need to hold people to account for, and what you can let go, what the best solution is versus, right? It's about being able to be in leadership and be regulated. And I know I still work on this, but I know enough now to know when I'm dysregulated, I'm not bringing people in. I'm pushing them further away. And so then I'm losing impact.
Mm.
The last section is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. Please finish.
And just the last section, I held that up is like many here, I am worried about where we're headed as a society. And I think we need courageous, brave leadership. And so the last section is when you have influence, some amount of influence, or and I should say this book is also for emerging leaders. I mean, it can be like at any stage in one's career. I think there's different things we can pull out. But when you have some influence, like how do you use it in a way that lifts up
Mm.
people around you? That you can
Mm.
see people in their struggles and their humanity and their capability and make things better.
Lovely. So there's lots of fabulous comments coming in. I'm going to pull out a couple of things. People talking about the wisdom that's in the book, the content of the book, and how practical it sounds. There's two comments that came up, and I see them a little bit interrelated. So I'd love for you to try to address them. The first is Barb says, "Can you say a little bit more about faith?" And having faith in the last chapter. And I think it has a relationship to me, but there's also a comment that I think is connected, which is Khadija said, "Can you talk about this idea of forgiveness? Because doesn't that also just empower the racists?" And so having faith and forgiveness feels like they're an intimate part of your book. Can you talk more about them?
Yeah, well, there's a reason they come at the end. And I don't start with them at the beginning because the book, I think it's true. Any of us that have, it's very easy when we're not in leadership to think things are black and white, but any of us that have been in management roles, you start to just realize how much more complex people and teams and organizations and the society we're part, how much more complex all of this is. How people are not any one thing, how teams are not any one thing, how situations are rarely one thing. And so Kajia, I want to say I totally get your comment that it could be read, forgiveness could be read as people that do wrong by us just are let off the hook. That is not that is not where I'm coming from. Where I'm coming from is the perspective of um, when we are what's the word caught up over a long period of time in anger towards others, the person we hurt the most is ourselves. And it also impacts our leadership in that that anger can accumulate. And for some leaders I've seen, it can result in this whole system is effed up and we got to burn the whole thing down. Well, that statement may have its place if you're in a protest or you're on the streets trying to push for change externally, but it's not useful if you're inside an organization. And so, as leaders, there is a responsibility in leadership to that chapter on forgiveness talks about like we have to sort of and I say for myself, it's not like I've reached forgiveness or let people off the hook that have done wrong by me, but I try. And I think it's a trying that is the point. I try and understand where they're coming from and see their humanity so that I can not have it eat away at me. And I'm also not doing to them what they did to me, which is dehumanize. And then I have more room to be able to make meaning for people, like if that person or whatever happened affected more than me, like I can help my group make meaning and help us move forward because I don't know about you folks, but I'm just speaking for myself. If I get up in the morning and I think this whole society is burning down, it's not motivating. It doesn't help me in any way, shape, or form. And I choose to believe it's more complex and that there's millions of people like me trying to do better. Anyway, that's a long answer. And faith is connected. That I think part of our responsibility is having faith that things can be better in the future, um, even if it doesn't feel like that at times, and that we offer that to people around us because despair over time just bubbles into depression. And as someone has struggled with depression, um, I don't do more. I just start doing less and less.
Mm, thank you. There's so much in there to unpack. And you know, there's another two comments that sort of show up that are interesting, which is Natasha was talking about, and it's a little bit related here, is how do you do this? How do you do this dance of both um, acknowledging, understanding racism, sexism, all the different forms of discrimination that exists? How do you do that and also not fall into um, this low rank kind of situation where you feel victimized, because that's a really tough balance. And a prompt in that is also from Suzanne, was saying, well, is this something to do with personal power, um, uh, forgiveness from a place of personal power versus a place of low power appeasement, right? Different kinds of things. So I see those together, but I'm wondering if you could think on that, and if there's a story from the book that might be illustrative of, this point around how to do these different tensions, because that's what I hear you saying. You're not saying it's either this or that, but that you have to hold these different dimensions, and you've got to learn to hold them rather than going, yes, it's always racism,
Mhm.
or you've always got to be empowered. Nothing can get in your way. You're actually saying, how do you hold both of these? But is there a story or an example from the book that might illustrate any of that, or just any response you want to make to it?
I think what people have said is very apt. That it's exactly that if I can get to a point where I feel whole, connected to these different parts of myself, there is a place where I can acknowledge indignities and hurt and injustices done to me. And I'm not saying that we don't get to stew in that and rage at that, or that we shouldn't do anything about that. But there is a way where I can not let it pull me into feeling less. I guess that's the personal power piece. That I can hold on to my own feeling of power. And I think when we act from a place of power, um, we hold people accountable without dehumanizing them. And I think that's part of how we change the rules of the game, because part of what oppression does in our systems, the part of the breakdown is that um, you hurt me and I'm going to grow and justify my anger towards you, and then I weaponize it, and it just creates a cycle of not only conflict, but it just sets up the next wave of dehumanization. And it's hard. It's really hard not to want to get back at people that are oblivious,
Mhm.
entitled, privileged, just plain, or don't are not interested in learning how to do better, or mean. Um,
Mhm.
but they don't get to take away my sense of myself.
Yeah. Well, you and I have had some interesting conversations around this, because, I think about, a context in which, even in our neighborhood, I remember like there was some things that happened with people who lived in the neighborhood, and I was really upset, and I didn't want to talk to a bunch of people. I didn't want to, I was very cool when I walked by, didn't say things. And what I realized is that my inability to forgive, and that doesn't mean accountability or for, these kind of things, but what it did was I was altering who I was. That's not who I was. It was taking up so much more energy to be in that state. And so finding a way, and I think this idea of having faith, this idea of finding meaning, how do you make meaning when things don't feel like they're resolved, or they're, someone did or said something that they didn't really take accountability for. And so for me, one of the things is I stopped being myself. Well,
Hmm.
racism wins when I stop being myself, when I
Yeah.
can't be my whole self, right? And so I know you and I have had those conversations. That's what's making me think of as you say that. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. I mean, so I feel like this question, maybe I'll just do a quick, what does holding people accountable without dehumanizing them look like? So just really quickly, Shaquille, let's say that you are somebody I work with who has made a comment at lunch that is, um, let's say, insulting towards my culture or religion, and I feel angry about it.
Yeah.
The unforgiving, wounded part of me, which would kind of be the trauma response, would be, um, uh, and not to say that I might say this to someone in the workplace, but even thinking it, like we all, it still comes across, even if we don't say the words. But it would look something like, uh, I can't believe you said that. Like you're talking about my culture and community. Um, like how dare you? You haven't worked at this organization as long. You don't know all the stuff I've put into this. You don't get to put me down. Um, you have no fucking idea what I go through. I'm gonna go. If you don't apologize publicly for this, I'm gonna go to HR and I'm gonna report this. And you better be careful and watch out because I'm watching you. That's one example. Now, that's if I'm doing it in a way where I'm not dehumanizing you, it might look something like, and of course, this is a micro example. There's so many, but just, um, hey, Shaquille, uh, I don't know if you're aware of the comment that you made at lunch yesterday, but I heard it and it impacted me. It was really hurtful, and I feel angry about it. And I'd like to let you know why. And then I would share why. Um, and if you didn't get it in that first conversation, I might choose whether to have another stab or two, and maybe I might go to HR at a certain point. But I would try and my anger and my hurt have not left,
Hmm.
but I'm in charge of them rather than them being in charge of me.
Hmm. Right.
And that's my power.
Yeah. Well, it sounds also like what you're saying is that, compassion is really important in this process, like compassion for yourself, but a compassion for other people, of not knowing, and that the cycles that can create. And, one of the things that I've certainly seen within the justice world is that, this idea of forgiveness comes across really harshly sometimes as just straight up judgment. It comes across as, that's not good enough, you're not good enough. And that in itself can turn into a cycle where people, it doesn't matter whether it's just about people who are racialized or not racialized or minoritized or not, it can just turn into these competitions where someone is more oppressed than the other, the oppression Olympics and things like that, where it can just get where this absence of forgiveness can nurture a culture, I think, which is what you're trying to disrupt in this idea of, well, yes, acknowledge racism, and yes, you can be empowered in that place. You can show up with with forgiveness, but you can also show up with assertiveness. I don't think you're saying forgiveness wipes away accountability, but it does. It is something that is a long-term process, it feels like. Very
Yeah, I
lovely.
think forgiveness allows our holding people accountable to be more effective,
Mm,
way more effective. And that's the thrust of a lot of this is like, it's not about, hey, do this because you're fitting into nice corporate white dominant cultural norms. It's about, hey, if you can uh, work through your emotions, so by the time you hold somebody accountable or challenge them or pick your battle, you will be 1,000 times more impactful. And I know that shit because I've had to learn the difference. And so other people have as well. And
yeah.
so, you know, I'm just gonna, because I know we're coming to the end, just I want to just read this because the whole, um, you know, what delights me about this book is that seeing people that I know and people that I imagine and people um, standing in their full light inside organizations and just being able to speak truth and speak bravely and challenge things and do that in a way where they don't lose parts themselves. Um, and I'm not idealizing that. I'm not saying it's easy. This book is a testament to how it's not easy, but it is possible. And I'm just going to read this last chapter of the intro. Recently, I heard someone say that in everything they read, write, or speak, they think about who their people are. My people are you. My people are other people of color who are brilliant, smart, talented, and ready to fan the flames of leadership so the prisons of racism are burnt to the ground and new paths forward are built from the ashes. Our voices are needed because, as Audre Lorde famously said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And this master's house, where white folks remain in charge of all the major institutions, I'm speaking about in Western democracies, with BIPOC folks doing most of the on the ground work, is slowly shifting and needs our leadership, a better kind of leadership, to be reimagined and rebuilt. We need leaders to challenge patterns of oppression and courageously find new and different ways to lead in service of everyone, not just those we identify with. We may get burned in our attempts to step forward and make change, but if we don't bring the fire, who will? In solidarity toward building the world that we want.
Thank you, Annahid. Thank you. That's very lovely. Thank you so much for being here today, everybody. Thank you, Annahid, for your amazing contribution um, to the field and for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you again for all the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To you both.
Thank you both.
Way to go,
Good to
Anahid.
see you.
Thank you so much,
This
Annahid.
was great. Thanks, Annahid.
Congratulations on your book, Annahid.